What's up, podcast family? I'm so thrilled that you're here for this episode of the podcast. My name's Aaron Lee. If you're just joining us for the first time, I'm the host of this podcast, and this is all about living an authentic life, being real, and not giving up. Just keep trying, keep pushing forward, and that's why we do what we do. And I'm just very thankful that we get to do this together because it's important to know that we're not alone. As always, please hit that subscribe button, rate, review, share the podcast. It would mean so much to me. And I know that it would help others if we can just get the word out about these episodes. So please consider doing that. That would be awesome. I'm so thrilled for this episode of the podcast because I have my friend Katelyn Tabb joining me to talk about her struggles with anxiety and how she's went through different seasons of that and worked through that. And I just think it's important for us to hear other people's voices and where they are and what they've been dealing with and some of the things that have helped them in their journey. And so I know you'll be very blessed by the conversation that we were able to have. And I hope that you feel like you can relate to these things because it's important, as we mentioned earlier, to not feel alone, not be afraid to share your journey with someone else because that's important. You can't do this alone. And so in this episode, we talk about different things from her life as a high schooler to her current life as a mom and wife. And, you know, the reality is that many of us go through different seasons of anxiety and we can all relate to one season or another. So just sit back, enjoy this episode. I'm so grateful for Katelyn. So let's go. All right. Hey, Katelyn, thanks for being on this episode of the podcast. Katelyn is one of those people that actually cracks me up all the time. Like she's a part of our church and she's a volunteer in our ministry at church. And I lead worship there. And the funny thing is we'll be doing a song and all of a sudden I'll see Katelyn in the back of the room during rehearsal, just dancing around, having a good time with her girls. And that's super fun. So, Katelyn, thanks for jumping on here. We've talked a lot about anxiety. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I'll talk to anybody all the time. So,
well, I know that, but I'm grateful for you. You're an awesome person, and you bring so much to our team at Southeast, and I'm just very thankful. But you know, one of the things that I really appreciate about you is your honesty and vulnerability when it comes to your struggle with anxiety. And so what I would love for you and I to talk about in this episode is just your journey with that, you know? So, you know, like many of us, we deal with anxiety in our own lives. And I know I can go back and remember a time when my anxiety started to ramp up, but can you go back to a time when you remember when you first started noticing anxiety and what was that season like for you?
yeah, you know, probably back in high school, the very end of high school is when I first remember having trouble with my mental health. And I think it more started as depression. I vividly remember I had a couple kids that I would pick up, like classmates that I would pick up and drive to school. And a few times I would get to school and get in the parking lot and then just be overcome with like this feeling of sadness and just feeling like I had to cry. And I would kick my friends out of the car and just break out into tears. And I didn't even know why until, you know, and I didn't really have a choice of anything. I felt like I just would call my mom and say, Mom, I'm so sorry. Like I have to come home, and say that I didn't know why I was crying. It didn't really, I don't know, looking back, I think it was an anxiety because I wasn't nervous about anything specifically, but I was just kind of overcome with the feeling like I had to cry. So I started, thankfully, my mom got me in to see a counselor, and because mental health is definitely something, or mental illness, I guess, is something that runs in my family. So my mom was good to jump on that and get me in to see a counselor. and I saw her for a little while and they tried me on some medication, but once I went to college, I just wasn't really sure about all of it. So I stopped taking medicine and didn't really see anybody. But then, so I went to Western Kentucky University for undergrad and grad school. And then when I finished my grad school, I moved to I moved to Louisville and I started a job in a field that it was my first real job, but it was also at a nursing home. And that was when I really remember my anxiety like ramping up like crazy. I remember it was the first time I've ever not been able to sleep. And like usually put me in a bed and I will be like clonked out, but I was having trouble sleeping. I was waking up, like I'd fall asleep and wake up and I would just start reeling through all my patients at the nursing home and panicking, like, what if something went wrong? What if I did something? Because I was working on like swallowing skills and changing people's diets. And I was so afraid, like, if I changed something and something went wrong, it would be my fault. And I think I just was so worried about people's expectations and my own expectations, but then I was kind of putting in my head what I thought other people expected of me, which was typically perfection. So pretty much
No, sure.
that's when I really started like seeing side effects kind of in my life, like just the incessant worrying and the sleep and all that kind of stuff. And then, yeah, I don't know. From then, it's kind of stayed in that pattern. Like I've had major ups and downs, but it stayed lean more towards that anxiety part.
Yeah. Tell me what it was like. I'll go back a little bit on something you said. Tell me what it was like being able to talk to your mom about like what you're dealing with. I know that has to be hard
Yeah.
for anybody, to be able to talk to their parents about what they were struggling with. What was that like?
I think I didn't really know a lot about how I felt at that time, but I remember feeling comfortable going to her and saying, I don't know. I keep crying. And um, she was more familiar with it with my dad. He has struggled with depression his whole life and still does. And so she knew that that was important to see someone and to talk to someone. And so I never really, I guess, got super in depth talking to her about it until later in life. But I definitely felt comfortable at that time to go to her um, and say, something's wrong, something's up. And so, yeah.
Well, that's I would say for me in high school, I always kind of feared sharing that stuff, at least, and especially when you don't know what it is. You're like trying to share with people. And so I think it's awesome you're able to share some of that with your mom. So, like, what are some of the things, like, even now that you feel like are triggers for you, things that just, put you, uh, maybe rear up your anxiety?
That's definitely something I spend a lot of time thinking about because when you know how much you hate anxiety and experiencing it, you want to do everything you can to not.
Absolutely.
So, um, but it stinks, man, because it's hard. It is. I've not been able to like super pinpoint down, like, if this is going to happen, then I'm going to have a spell. But there are definite things that I feel like I've realized are triggers, like you said. Um, One of the big things I think is expectations for me. I don't feel like I am a perfectionist because I want to be perfect so I can like tell everybody about it, but I'm very much so a people person
Mm.
and a people pleaser, trying to get better at that. But I just want people to be happy. And I fear that I'm going to do something that's going to upset someone or disappoint someone or let someone down. So I think one of the big things where it all started with me is with work. I think I set these expectations, like I have to do a great job. For my clients. I'm a speech therapist. I kind of mentioned that before, and I don't know, whatever. But I work with the pediatric population, and so I see a lot of kiddos with different type of developmental delays, and um, so I want to help more than anything. I want to help these children and their families. And my biggest fear is that I'm going to let them down or do something wrong or just not be able to live up to what they need. So I put a lot of pressure on myself with that. And when things, it's not even when things are good, but when I feel like I'm doing a good job, then I'm okay and I can be calm and I can focus. But as soon as I start thinking that I'm not doing enough, I just start to panic. And that's where my thoughts just go and go. I just start thinking that I'm not good enough. I'm not trying hard enough. That people hate me, that people are thinking these terrible things about me. And it doesn't matter how much someone can tell me, no, you're doing great at your job. You are wonderful. Like my friends, my family, it just doesn't change it. So it's hard. So I think those expectations um, are tough. I also think that just changes. When I first started, when I was living in Louisville and I was having a lot of trouble, I was going through a lot. I was getting ready. I had just started my first job out of graduate school. And then I ended up getting engaged. Kelby and I got engaged. And after a year at that job, I was going to be moving to Elizabethtown, starting a whole different job, not working with the geriatric population, but working with kids. We were planning a wedding. We were buying a house. My dad was diagnosed with cancer. So it was literally like everything that could have gone wrong. And I remember one time I ended up, a wonderful friend of mine had suggested a counselor in Lexington. So I was living in E-Town and traveling to Lexington to see this lady because she was a wonderful Christian counselor. And I remember her just stopping and like writing down all of these things that I was going through, the things, that list that I just told you. And she was like, Katelyn, these are big things. These are big things that you are going through. These are like, it's natural to feel how you're feeling right now. So I think that took a huge weight off of me. But that doesn't mean that there's not little changes in my life that don't trigger some of these feelings. So, but Kelby and I Kelby is so great at helping me when I struggle, when I get in these, I call them kind of like my brain fogs. And so he's good to start. I mean, he even can recognize it in me sometimes before I do. So we're very, we're keeping our eyes out for anything that could start to set me back a little because we don't want to go to a bad place, basically.
Now, is he on the opposite side? Like, does he struggle with anxiety? Does he have any kind of those things that
No,
we deal with?
there's very few, I think about it. I've thought about it a couple times when you have done interviews with Jerica and how you guys are such different personalities, and Kelby and I are too. There's just a few times that I feel like he's kind of experienced the overwhelming, like feeling like he has so much to do kind of stuff. And then he'll start to feel that. But really, no one in his family or really his circle before he met me had dealt with it. But I think by the time I met him, and especially by the time we got engaged and I was struggling with it, I am very much an open book. So I wasn't going to hide it from him, but it has been a big hurdle in our marriage, and it does not make it easier for sure. So it is a constant learning curve, but he has never put me down for it. And I think that is so wonderful. He doesn't understand it. He hasn't experienced it really. But he's always supportive and trying to help me in those times.
Yeah. So do you think that having someone, you talked about your mom, having her to talk to, now you have your spouse that is supportive and understanding. I mean, it really helps you get through it, doesn't it?
Yeah. It causes me anxiety to think about someone struggling with it and not having a support system because I just can't imagine. I mean, there are times, I can't tell you how many days he literally picked me up and shoved me out the door and said, "You can do it, Katelyn. Just go." And he's like pushing me out the door to work. I'm like, no, you don't understand. But he's also sensitive. There have been times where, I mean, I remember a couple of days he had to pick up the phone and call my boss and say, Katelyn can't be there today.
Hmm.
She can't come. Like, we have lived through some very challenging times where the anxiety just literally took over my every ounce of my being. And it's just debilitating. It's awful. And so I'm grateful that I haven't been in a place like that recently, but man, it is real and it is awful. And it makes me just this person that I never want to go
Hmm.
back to being. And it's just tough. It is real tough.
Can we, if you're okay with it, can we push
Yeah.
down on that a little bit? And like,
Yeah.
what was that like? What were those seasons like for you? Like, tell me a little more about that.
Yeah. Man, it is tough. I mean, I just have vivid memories, and I know Kelby does too, of just these times where really there wasn't anything in particular that was a traumatic experience that happened, but it was like I started just spiraling down. And at this point, like I said, I had tried taking, they had prescribed some depression medication for me in high school, but really until, gosh, it was, probably a couple years after Kelby and I got married. But I tried so hard. I tried and I was like, no, I can't take medicine. And so I wasn't on medication for the longest time. I thought that I was going to have a faith that would be strong enough and I would just lean into my faith and that was going to fix everything.
Mm.
So in that time, I wasn't on any type of anxiety medication. And I was like, I would spiral and then I would get better. But when it got really bad, it was hard for me in those moments to kind of decipher between like depression and anxiety because I was so anxious that I think my brain would just literally run until it had nothing left. And then I would just like collapse and just sit there on the couch and just stare off into space. And Kelby would try everything to cheer me up. But I think just during those times, it was really dark and foggy. Like I couldn't,
Mm.
my brain wasn't really there to help problem solve to get out of the situation. And I was desperate, man. I was desperate just for something to flip the switch. There's
Yeah.
sometimes where I feel like I can be going through just such a terrible fog. And then it's like, bam, just something happens. And sometimes I don't even have a clue what it is. But then I come home from work that day and I'm like, oh my gosh, Kelby, I feel better. I'm okay. Like, and usually I kind of come out of it. But there was one time where I just couldn't do anything. Like I had nothing left in me. I was just sick. That was when Kelby finally was like, listen, we got to go and we got to find somebody to help you. Like, we can't keep living like this because I couldn't go to work. He literally put me in the car and was like driving me around trying to find somebody that could help me. And I ended up we drove just to this like behavioral health clinic in town. And I remember the lady saying, like, I went in and we both went in and I remember her saying, well, this is like an inpatient place. And I just looked at Kelby and I said, I don't care. Like, put me in here. Like, I was broken, Aaron. I was just so broken and I couldn't think and I couldn't process. And I felt like I was failing as a wife. I was failing at my career. I felt like I was failing at a child of God. Like, I just felt so worthless. It was awful. And Kelby could try to tell me anything. And I couldn't come out of it. And so I ended up that day getting an appointment with a psychiatrist or a psychologist at Southeast, actually. And it was like a few weeks out. I begged for like the first possible. And I survived or maybe it was just like a week out. I survived until then and ended up deciding to try medication and just see what it did for me. So yeah, that's, me. I could go on rants with my
Well, no,
stories,
that's
but
so good. Well, and that stuff's so important. That's the side of things that we don't get to talk about.
yeah.
And there's people who are right there in it right now, who are
Ah,
in that dark fog that you're talking about right now. But thank you for your vulnerability. I mean, you know how important that is to me, and so I appreciate so much you just sharing all that. Now, let's turn the corner a little bit. Like, the medicine was something that
help balance you out. But what are some of the other, important things that you've learned and developed to kind of help you with, your anxiety journey?
Yeah. Um, I think it's been a lot of learning to let go of things and to let go of control,
Mm,
really. Letting go of thoughts. I am very, like I said, I have these expectations for myself. And so I think sometimes it took me coming home from work some days and telling Kelby, like, I think that these people just think I don't know anything. And I think like that, whatever it was that was weighing me down, kind of just speaking that and letting him kind of hear that, or sometimes if it was too much for him, because I am guilty of coming home sometimes. And then when he asked me how my day went,
that's okay.
I would just like da, 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 going and going and going. And there was a point where I could tell, okay, I need to turn off here. But sometimes just writing down these lies that I was thinking in my head
Mm,
and wasting so much energy on, I would write it down and really work hard to either let go of it if it's something I had no control over, or stopping and telling myself, is this grounded in truth? Like, is this really true?
yeah.
Um, and finding out that a lot of times it's not, and I'm wasting my time worrying about it. Um, so I think definitely the letting go was a part of it. Um, Finding community and sharing with other people kind of helped me find a purpose in the struggle, because I think when all this started, it was so new to me and foreign. I remember thinking, I am a happy person. Like
Mm,
anyone who would have met me anywhere along my life, I feel like just knows that I'm outgoing and upbeat kind of person. I was class clown in high school, but I think most people were thinking, "What? Like, why?
yeah.
What do you mean you struggle with depression or and anxiety?" So I think finding a purpose in that struggle, because I started to say this before, but when it first started, I thought, okay, like I got to figure out how to fix it and
Mm,
move past it. And sadly, like that maybe it is for some people, but for me and a lot of people I know, like this is part of me and I'm going to fight it till the day I die
yeah.
probably. It's just going to be something that I carry with me, and so I think I go through bouts where I don't feel like this, but really trying to embrace the struggle and just, I don't know, finding purpose in it, finding a way to share with other people, to help people along the way. I think if I can be someone to someone else that I had in my life, like I had people who were pouring into me and encouraging me and loving me. That's the only way I got through it. So if I can support someone and tell them they're not alone, like that's okay. That's going to bring purpose to this struggle.
Yeah, that's so good, Caitlin. That's so good. I love the writing things down. I think I've even mentioned that once on the podcast, because it's something that helps me, like knowing what those lies are and just kind of putting them down on paper and be like, is this a real thing? Like, is this something I should be concerned about? So that's so good. Okay, so as we wrap up our time, what encouragement would you give to someone who's listening, who's walking that journey that you're on? Let's be real, you're still on that journey. You're, like you said, probably till the day you die, and that's okay. But what encouragement would you give to those people?
Man, first I would give them a big COVID hug. Like we're not allowed to give hugs, but I would break all the COVID rules and give them a big hug, because sometimes you just need a big hug. And I feel for anyone that is in a place that we've been through in our past, that we were talking about. Um, so I would start with a hug. And then I think just to keep fighting. There's going to be days where you don't feel like fighting for sure. And there were days where I just survived, I
Mm,
just got through the day, on those days when Kelby couldn't push me out the door and I said, I just have to stay home today or whatever. He's like, okay, just I'll be home in this many hours, just make it through. And
Wow.
I think just telling myself, I'm going to get through this, um, really filling yourself with truth. I know you talk a lot about your Christian faith, and I'm a firm believer that God has a purpose for my life,
Mm,
and He wants us to be filled with His truth, and we are His creation, and
mm,
He He wants us to know that we are loved and that our life has purpose. So I think just focusing on that and looking to Him for strength in those times, those crummy times,
mm.
but also that you can find purpose through the struggle, that it's terrible, it's awful. I hate anxiety with every ounce of my being. But if it's something that God has placed in our life, I think just working through it and trying to get better at it every day. And I think keep searching for a community like this. I think, a lot of times in my really down days, I'm like, if I'm sitting in the parking lot at work, anxious to go in, I would be scrolling, like trying to find something, looking up anxiety, like scripture for anxiety
Mm.
or sermon on anxiety, podcast on anxiety, which when you started this, that's why I was so excited. I'm like, you don't know how many times I've been in the podcast app thinking like, quick, I just need something to like click my brain into action for the day.
Sure.
So I think just search, like, keep fighting and don't just think, man, this stinks and I'm cursed and I'm all alone.
Mm.
You're not. There are so many people, and I guarantee you, if you talk to other people or search for other people, you're going to find a community of individuals that have been there. And there's just really nothing like having someone who has been in your place, in a really crummy, crappy place, that can sit down. And if you just need to sit in silence, that's okay. But it's someone who can give you, also have somebody to give you ideas of what worked for them. So I think just really pushing and fighting to find purpose, and not giving up, and just knowing that you're not alone and you can get through it. I feel like a lot of it's repetitive, but
No, no, no. That's really good, Caitlin. It's like really, really important pieces I think all of us need to hear. And
Mhm.
obviously we're telling ourselves every day, you and I doing the same thing, trying to do that stuff. And so thanks for saying all that. Thanks for that encouragement. I know it means a lot to people, because I would imagine that there's people sitting there right now just feeling very alone, feeling
Mm,
very lost. And unfortunately, I know firsthand, I've heard people talk about it. They don't have spouses that do what our spouses do. And so there's people who are journeying that alone.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
just heart goes out to those people. And
I think it is hard being vulnerable and opening up about it, but I feel like it just released something for me when I started to tell people, oh, this is really how I genuinely feel. And I don't know what it would be like to not feel comfortable to go to a family member or something like that. But just friends, like just little conversations that when I shared with people, really, I felt like opened up a door for them to be vulnerable with me too.
yep.
People, after I was sharing this with friends, even friends that I didn't think struggled with it, I would just be real with someone. And when I was talking to a friend on the phone, be like, man, I'm not doing well, and just being honest with them. And how many times those people who I would have never thought would ever struggle with that have then called me, even years later to say, help, help, like something's, I'm not feeling right. So I think it is a scary idea to open up and think that no one's going to understand. But I guarantee you that somebody, has some type of connection with it,
Yeah.
that they could maybe just let you, just like we said, that feeling, to help kick that feeling that you're all alone in it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just getting it out of your head helps a ton. Because when you
Hmm.
when you live in your head tends to tell you
Mm.
what to think, and it gives terrible advice sometimes.
Exactly.
Well, Caitlin, I hope you know how much you and your family mean to me and my family, and I really, really appreciate you doing this. I've been hounding you for months trying to get you on
Hey.
here because I love what you have to say, and I think it's so important for so many people. So thanks for sharing. Thanks for being a part of this.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I love what you're doing. And I know that it's going to help people out there for sure.
All right. Thanks, Katelyn.
Such a rich conversation with my friend Katelyn. I hope that hearing her reminds you that there are so many people out there who are wrestling, struggling, dealing with this thing called anxiety, with mental health, with depression. And man, we have to be able to talk about these things. I just love what she had to say, and the reminder of the importance of getting it out there and being vulnerable and asking for help. There's nothing wrong with that. And so please remember that. Please lean into that. And that's something that's important to me and the goal of the community that we build with this podcast. If you would, you can jump over to the Facebook group, the Anxious Pastor Community. That group is meant to be a place where we can share some of our struggles and just talk about the things that are going on in our lives. So if you want to jump over there, join the group, be sure to answer the questions that you're prompted with so I know that you're a real person. So check that out, the Anxious Pastor Community group on Facebook. Also, be sure to check out the show notes over at theanxiouspastor.com. And as I mentioned earlier, hit that subscribe button, share it, rate, and review. Well, as always, let's be real, let's live authentic, and let's get trying.